And we are back, and it is time for the ElseWords. This is the big discussion point, which this week I have no idea what it could possibly be. I mean, it is an utter complete mystery. For those of you who are watching the video, you see what it is because I'm holding it. It is Action Comics number 1000. I have the 1960s variant cover done by Michael Allred and Laura Allred because I am a sucker for the Allred's art. Like, I would get I would get that Superman tattooed on me. If the person could do their art justice, and I love his art style. Okay, I'm gonna say I love his art style.
But I find that even your average tattoo artist can reproduce something pretty well, because that's a lot of what they do is reproducing. You find the really good ones to do something original or to put a creative spin on it. Mm-hmm. And it's nice when you find a tattoo artist who you can design something with.
Yeah.
Obviously, we come in there with our own ideas as to what we want, and sometimes if you've got an artist friend who will help you design something, you want that kind of exact thing. But if you build up a relationship with the tattoo artist and you let them kind of explore and express themselves with what they're doing, you wind up with something that is much more individualized, much more special. And that's kind of the whole point is tattoo artists are still artists, and some are better than others, but it gives them the ability to do more. But back to Superman.
Yeah, back to Superman. And honestly, as Garley's saying, is that cover Superman looks like the style from my youth. I don't know exactly how old you are, but yeah, I mean that's the Allred style. It is done in that classic comic book format. He's also done, actually I should say they, because I believe Laura did some of the colors for Silver Surfer over at Marvel recently with Dan Slott. But that's
cool. They've worked together a long time. Yeah. And Mike's got those very clean lines. If you ever have the opportunity, I don't know if you have, check out his Mad Men stuff, because that was his creator-owned work for a long time. Really good, weird, bizarre stuff, but just beautiful to look at. And everything he's worked on is kind of that same way. It's just gorgeous.
Oh yeah. But we're not here talking about that cover. No, we're talking about the other things that were in it. So this is the 80-page super spectacular image, spectacular book that this is. It is actually thick. So this is the one problem I have. Because it is so big, they didn't do the traditional staple binding. They did the graphic novel binding, as you can see right there where it says Action Comics, number 1000 on it. It made some of the panels harder to read.
Yeah, I find that that's a problem. One of the things that I think we've talked about this before when it comes to digital comics, I'm still prone to read single comics in paper format. But when it comes to collections, which is what I'd rather read stuff of anyways, I would rather read it digitally, because with collections, you've got to worry about when you open these pages, is the binding strong enough that it's not going to break? The pages aren't going to come out in some cases, because some stuff is just not put together as well as others. And it's a big, thick book. It becomes a little bit unruly. Sometimes it doesn't stay open. It just sort of depends. So that digital collection for that seems more interesting to me, feels more comfortable to me. The only thing is when you've got 2-page spreads is you have to have a pretty big reader to be able to do that.
Yeah. And that's where with a lot of them, and Growley's pointing out, unless you're willing to crack the spine, so he buys 2 copies. With this, I was able to get around it because there wasn't really any 2-page spreads, or at least any 2-page spreads that's like, oh my God, I can't read, because it was mainly the text and stuff, where I'm of that same mindset of, I would find it digitally and then read it that way. But with this, I was like, okay, I'm gonna read it because I want to read this for the show, because this is what everyone is talking about.
Well, the reason why people are talking about it, we should point out, is that it's the 80th anniversary of Action Comics.
Yes, and it is also the 1000th issue of a comic book, which has never happened and all that. So I mean it is a twofer. Like, it was 80 years ago today, Action Comics came out. And Action Comics started, and we got the creation of Jerry Schuster and Siegel, And this book, where I will say right now, it does have a steeper price tag at $7.99. I was okay paying that because of the fact that you're getting a lot of stories. You're getting Dan Jurgens, Norm Rapmund. You have 10 stories in here. And then you have 3 pinups from John Romita Jr., Walter Simonson, and Jorge Jimenez. But yeah, all these stories are so good in here. You've got a brilliant story with Superman and Lex Luthor called The Fifth Season. That was written by Scott Snyder with art by Raphael Albuquerque. But yeah, flipping through here for the visual people, Marv Wolfman did some stuff in here. The big one is the back part, because that is the premiere of Brian Michael Bendis with DC. A little upstart writer who did some work over at Marvel Comics, coming over to DC. And that's the one that's doing a lot of setup here.
Surprised you didn't talk about his work at Caliber.
Because I don't know his work at Caliber. So he is doing he's setting up the story for the short limited series that he is doing with Jim Lee called The Men of Tomorrow. And the villain that they set up in here, which I heard a lot of people talk about, actually is really interesting. And I'm not going to say why it's interesting, but it's interesting. With what they're setting up here, I like it because it's telling me that with Brian Michael Bendis in here, hopefully Jeff Johns won't have to retcon all the time, and do these big do these big issues like Rebirth, where it's going to fix everything, air quotes around the word fix, where, they'll have someone else who can do some good stuff. Some of the other people they got in here, they got Brad Meltzer in here doing a story. That story was really good. It's called Faster Than a Speeding Bullet. They talk about a lot about, this is a crash course in Superman. There's a story in here with Vandal Savage sending him back to the beginning, and he's reliving everything. Talking about, with the shield, with the classic shield, where he didn't, he couldn't fly, he didn't have, all these other powers, and how he was like a bull in a china shop and all. And I'm like, dude, this is just so good. Like, I love this, and there's not much more I can say.
Well, so this is what I wanted to talk about in this discussion. Why I recommended it for the ElseWords is that we are talking about a character that has existed for 80 years, 1,000 issues of this comic, not to mention the Superman comic, the Man of Steel comics, which Bendis is now bringing back Man of Steel as a comic series. I think there was Adventures of Superman. There's been a lot of different material with Superman. TV shows, radio shows, movies. It's just like lunchboxes, everything. And that's kind of what I want to get into. And it's reflected in this book, is that this character started out in humble beginnings. It was a couple of guys who created a character that it's been argued whether or not they got ripped off for it or anything, but simple idea, which was still kind of extraordinary at the time. Sent from another planet that all his people were killed on, arrives on Earth, raised as a human, shows extraordinary abilities, uses them to right wrongs, fight crime, truth, justice, American way, which was a big deal back then. And for all intents and purposes, that could have been it. A lot of comic characters came and went, and didn't make it these 80 years. Some of them have had revivals here and there, but Superman has been constant this entire time. Part of that constant comes from the fact that I think it wasn't the same two guys writing him. At some point, hands changed. And as hands changed and new creative minds come in, everybody put their own little spins on it. Like you're talking about with what Bendis is doing going forward. Will that have to be retconned or not? Superman has seemingly benefited from everybody involved bringing something new to the table, be it an introduction of a character. Now, some characters were there from the beginning. I assume Lois Lane, some of the Daily Planet stuff and everything, but other characters, Luther, secondary hero characters like Supergirl. Like, for years, Superman was the only survivor of Krypton. And they introduce his cousin, and they introduce the villains from the Phantom Zone, and then they introduce Crypto, the super dog, and Beepo, the super monkey, and the bottled city of Kandor, and all of these other things that get brought in over time that build a mythos. The power sets change. He goes from being able to leap tall buildings in a single bound to actually being able to fly. We get heat vision. We get super breath. We get super hypnosis, and that's how he makes people not recognize him through his glasses. The flying backwards in time thing, the weird S symbol that he throws at the Kryptonian in Superman 2, which is probably just Kryptonian technology and only worked in the Fortress of Solitude. But the Fortress of Solitude is another thing that's added. All of these different things that happen when we look at the modern age of comic books and we see how tough it is to get a new superhero at either company, at DC or Marvel, to launch and to be accepted, to have their book sales reach a marketable level and continue and not have to be rebooted or get canceled and put the character in someone else's book or have them get killed off or whatever. Like, how many successful comic characters have popped up in the last 20 years since the 90s? I mean, we're all excited about the fact that Deadpool had a huge hit in his movie, and now they're introducing Cable and Domino that were introduced essentially the same time, I think in the same issue, actually, as Deadpool was.
Yeah.
And we're just seeing them get up to screen. But how many other characters have come and gone in that amount of time alone?
I was going to say, but even then, they don't even meet that mark because weren't they created it in 93 or 93, 94?
Yeah, early 90s.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying, though, is that, but how hard is it to get? Like, we've had a whole bunch of new characters introduced just in the last couple of years, be it in DC Comics or Marvel Comics. And the struggle to get those characters to take off, to have their books, make enough sales to continue to sell their trades and everything. Superman is 80 years old, and Superman has things ahead of everybody else. Growley is pointing out that Batman's Detective Comics should hit 1,000 next year, and it'll be the year of Batman. That's another character that's benefited from this. We joked a little bit earlier about Wonder Woman going through some bad phases of costumes and weird storylines. They've all gone through weird storylines and costumes. Dear God, Electric Blue Superman from the 90s. Whoa. And then two Superman, the Superman Red, Superman Blue thing, which is funny because it's a throwback, but still. The idea of people say, well, Superman's boring, and that's why it's hard to get him to work on the big screen. I can't understand how anybody can think of the rich, illustrious history of the character of Superman, and just him, and find him boring, let alone the wealth of the supporting cast of Lois Lane, who is one of the most incredible characters in comics in her own right, not just as a supporting character, but as herself. Jimmy Olsen, and what was done with Jimmy Olsen in the stories by Jack Kirby, especially Perry White. These characters are so great. And then Superman's Rogues Gallery is easily in the top 5, maybe even higher than that, of Rogues Galleries in comics. Superman's Rogues, Batman's Rogues, Spider-Man's Rogues, Flash's Rogues. Like, if you want to get the best villains, those are the ones who are giving them to you. You just have everything to choose from those 4 characters. There, you have no loss of like, oh, well, I'd like to have this kind of villain. There's one. You can easily pick from any of their sets to find a villain that will work out. And how they interact with those characters is just so cool. So when you've got a character that's been literally able to do anything and has had every different kind of story done with him, and every other company has ripped him off in some way to make their own Superman or their own anti-Superman. You've got your Sentries, you've got your Irredeemable, you've got Supreme over at Extreme Studios that Alan Moore did. So many different things of like, yeah, it's like Superman, but Superman's the real deal. And it's just like, it's kind of unfair because he is the pinnacle hero. He's not just like the top hero of DC Comics, but he is essentially the top hero of comics overall. It's unfortunate because I always was more of a Captain Marvel fan than a Superman fan, and it's because of the similarities that unfairly found in court that Captain Marvel got shit canned and Fawcett Comics had to go away, and DC got to grab Captain Marvel, but like they never put him in the same pedestal that they put Superman.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with DC, it's their trinity. They know these are our moneymakers. It's Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. And even then, Wonder Woman didn't seem to land at the same point. That's why we had World's Finest with Batman and Superman for the longest time.
And I'll point out something here for the people who complain about Superman being too, like whatever it is, for being on the big screen. I mean, for the movies, yeah, it might be a little bit more difficult because people expect things differently. But I mean, look at TV. Have we had a live action Batman TV series since the 66 Batman that has, lasted a while? I am not including Gotham in this, by the way, because that's not a Batman show.
Yes, we have had Arrow. Which Stephen Amell actually took somebody insult on Twitter, Walmart Batman. And he's like, I'm owning that. I am using that and I'm owning that now. I'm Walmart Batman.
But that's more to the credit of Stephen Amell and all that. But
yes.
But even then, so even you go Arrow. Arrow has what, 6 seasons? We'll have 7 seasons, I believe. Yeah, 6 seasons. They've got renewed for a 7th. Still got 4 more seasons before you catch up on Smallville. Smallville, wildly successful, with the WB and then into CW.
But I sort of challenge you: is Smallville any more a Superman story as it is as Gotham is a Batman story?
Big difference between the two is Smallville truly is Clark Kent before he's Superman.
Gotham is Bruce Wayne before he's Batman, supposedly. Until we see him in the Cape and Cowl, he's not Batman. And until we saw Clark as Superman, he was a red-blue blur. He was these other things. We had a Justice League in the series without a Superman. We had a Supergirl in costume in the series without a Superman. So it's the same deal. And it was always said, we're not going to make him fly. We're not going to call him Superman. Because as soon as we do that, that's when we close the door on it. And so it feels a little bit like they were ashamed, which I don't think that's really what it was. It's just we know the audience that we're marketing this to. They're not going to buy a show about a guy flying around in blue tights and a red cape with his drawers on the outside, which I'm so glad are coming back. But we can do a drama, a teen drama about a guy who feels different and alien and has secrets that he has to hide from the people that he's most wanting to entrust with his secrets. And then they just kind of ballooned out from that. And his best friend is going to one day be his worst enemy.
Yeah. I will put it to you this way. This is more a Superman show than Gotham is a Batman show. Because, I mean, with this, they're still hitting on the core of why Superman how Superman gets to this point here, gets to be the guy standing there with his hands on his hips, wearing his underwear on the outside, with the cape flapping in the wind, and then off to go save someone and all that. Where with Gotham, it's something completely different. I even heard them, talk about how they're going to reboot the series next year, and I'm just like, okay, and I understand there's a following. I don't want to rag on it because it's not my cup of tea, but at the same time, it seems like they're not hitting at the same, I'm going
to admit that neither is my cup of tea. I had a lot of problems with it, but I liked Smallville up until Jonathan died, because that felt like, again, when it stopped being really what I expected from a young Superman learning his powers story, because there wasn't somebody who could really teach him anymore. On the other hand, that's also about the time that they introduced Lois, and I think Lois brought a lot to that show.
Yeah.
But with Lois's introduction, he should have been Superman by then. So it lost a lot of that dynamic for me. Still, it got them definitely not my show, and I see your points. It's just when you've got a Supergirl show on TV, which is great,
Mhm.
you know, you should have a Superman show.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because once you have Superman, and I think they've addressed this a little bit with Supergirl too, it's hard for the other characters to be at that level.
Yeah.
You either have to depower the character, which takes away some of the hubris of who the character is. Not the hubris, the admiration of the character, I guess, is all I can say, because he's the guy. You know, when people are standing next to Superman, they should feel like, holy shit, I'm standing next to Superman. And it doesn't matter if you're Green Lantern, and it doesn't matter if you're Aquaman. You should be like, yeah, but there's this guy, you know. And it's not like I think I'm shit, but next to this guy, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I can pull my weight. I can't pull his weight. Wonder Woman can pull her weight compared to Superman. Batman can, in a very different way, pull his weight. And so it's the process of making these things. But once you have those three, and that's what we don't have in the CW shows, again, because how much does Green Arrow shine next to those three characters? How much does the Flash? You know, if he's super fast, we saw that in the Justice League movie.
Mhm.
It's like, hey, I'm super fast. Oh, fuck, Superman's just as fast as I am, it looks like. Or at least really close, and it's going to fuck me up. That kind of stuff is, again, did Superman become too powerful? And did he become too powerful because over time, each person who came in wanted to put their new spin on it, and they did that with a new power? Or they were like, hey, I've created this thing, and I want Superman to be able to fight the villain, but the only way he can pull out of it is if he can do this special thing that we've never had him do before. And they would do that on Smallville all the time, especially in the early seasons. Like when they introduced the heat vision, it was like they alluded to it in that episode, but it's not like they had alluded to it for weeks going into it. It was just all of a sudden, well, I need heat vision, and here it is. That's the kind of storytelling that is aggravating because it's the Deus Ex Machina, but it is what happened over the years. And so now Superman has so many different things. You know, he's been a super genius. He's been a scientist. He's been all these different things in the comics that the only way to bring it back is to reboot him or to depower him in some way. And that's tough. It's not as bad as taking away the marriage, which has killed things. But that's another part too, is that we're in an era now where Superman has a kid and Batman has a kid, you know, and these kids have personalities, and they've had their own comic and stuff. So we have moved past, like, Superman as I knew him wasn't married to Lois Lane. He didn't get married to her until the 90s, and that was just because they wanted to beat the Lois and Clark show. But they definitely have, like, a kid now, which is, like, that's a permanent thing. And it leads to do you keep going forward with that? Does that kid grow up? Does Superman age when that kid grows up? Because Superman has constantly been in his 30s.
Yeah.
Like, as long as I've known him, he's always been in his 30s. Unless you're talking about Earth 2 Superman, where he got to age with Lois and everything. That's just been where he is. Batman, same thing. Batman's in his 30s. Dick Grayson's in his early 20s. When he wasn't a teenager, when they introduced Tim Drake, Dick got aged up. Tim was a teenager. But then it's like, now we've got 50 Robins running around. They can't all be in their fucking 20s and teens.
Yeah.
Just and that's the continuity issue. There's benefits because everybody has a Superman story that they can go and find and be their Superman. But there's hindrances because, but to make that all work in one big line of continuity, it's tough. You know, your favorite Superman story contradicts someone else's favorite Superman story.
Yeah, that's where I look at, like, personally, I look at the New Superman of China book, where it's written by Gene Luen Yang, where they limited his powers. You know, it was him discovering the powers, but even then they limited it with, you know, he has, you know, essentially 8 powers. He has super speed. He has what is it? It's speed, strength, hearing, laser vision. But there's a couple of ones that I'm forgetting right now. But I mean, it's very, you know, it is limited, and they're basically like, this is it. Now, if the Superman of China book or the Justice League of China book, as it's it's switched over to, if that still carries on, which I hope it does, because it's the only Justice League book that I am actually reading at this point until No Justice. Um, then I mean, that part to me seems like it makes a lot of sense, because and sort of solves this problem, because it is a lot of the powers that, when you go ask Joe somebody off of the street who only really knows Superman from like the movies and maybe Smallville, but doesn't know of or really care to look into the breadth of history with all the powers that Superman has had. Those are usually the ones that they say that he has. Like, oh, he's got the super speed and the flight, and and the X-ray vision, and the the heat vision and frost breath, stuff like that. They don't get into, well, he's got super ventriloquism and some of the other bullshit powers that he's had over the years.
The things that are the bat shark repellent of Superman.
Yeah.
And that's the Justice League cartoon did a really good version of Superman where they kept his power levels lower until that point in time where he's fighting Darkseid, and he reveals, he's like, you don't understand. I've been holding back this entire time because I'm afraid of what would happen if I unleashed my full strength on somebody. But I don't have to hold back with you. He just gets so fed up and he just unleashes, and you see like, oh shit. But that would be, and that makes sense for the character. There's a potential power level there that he doesn't open up with because he could do too much damage. He's trying to protect humanity. He's trying to protect his adopted world. So he can't lead with that much power. Plus, anytime you introduce that much power, it ups the threats that are put at you. It's one thing for someone to push past their limits from time to time, show a feat of strength, and then get out of something. But when it's like, oh yeah, I can bench press this entire galaxy, it's like, well, then we know that we are not playing at a level that you're playing at, and we have to up our games to that. And so that's where it's like, okay, shit. But as a writer, you write yourself into a corner of, how do you have something that can compete with Superman? And so you either have to introduce cheats, or you have to introduce 10 different versions of Kryptonite, or you have to bring it back. I think we've tried to make him so omniscient and so important that it's a struggle to keep him in check with everything else. And I like a balanced team and a balanced world more. I like those kinds of stories more. Just the same that it's a little ridiculous that they made Wonder Woman bulletproof in the comics from time to time when she's got the wrist bracelets that are supposed to block bullets. That's one of the cool aspects of Wonder Woman, is that she would block the bullets with the bracelets, and to make her bulletproof. It's like, well, then why are you doing that? And I get that. Yeah, well, they're not just blocking bullets; they can block other things too. But it's like that's that specialness of, this is why she's cool. The lasso makes her cool. The bracelets make her cool. The tiara is cool. Like the invisible jet for a long time was cool. And I just love that stuff, even if it doesn't all make sense. That classic feel. But again, so many times that I've seen the DC universe relaunch numerous times. We've seen it relaunch in our friendship, and we have known each other that many years. But like, I can tell you, in my lifetime, I've seen it relaunch. A few years go by, relaunch, or soft reboot, or whatever they call it at that point, and we kind of like reset, get back, do it again. And that's how it's always going to be. And so it's weird when someone comes in and is like, everything you know about Superman is going to change. Well, that's great hyperbole. Yeah. But it's kind of like, how many times have I heard that at this point? For the new fan, it may be something interesting, but for the old fan, it's not. But if you can tell a good story, then we can accept it. And we know that everything that we know about Superman is going to change back at some point, and then it's going to change again, and it's just a constant cycle. But that's what keeps Superman relevant. Superman's also one of the things that has been part of the Mickey Mouse law, which is the copyright term limits that just they kept extending copyrights further and further out so that other companies wouldn't get to do Superman stuff, and the original owners wouldn't get the rights to Superman back. So they've worked out stuff where they paid the families off for it, but the copyright laws, Superman should have been in the public domain decades ago, just like Mickey Mouse should have been in the public domain decades ago. And it's at one part frightening to think, what if anybody could just have Superman and just tell the stories that they decide to tell with him and change stuff up, and how hard would it be? Because just because you have the rights to Superman doesn't mean you have the rights to everything that is part of Superman's world and life, like Supergirl, Bottleton and Candor, or Superboy, all these other things. But how weird would it be if like Marvel could do a Superman comic? Or how weird would it be if Boom Studios could do an actual Superman comic because it's out there? Or Dynamite, or Avatar, of all things, Avatar Press with their weird books, Superman having zombie sex. It's like that's something that could conceivably happen. It kind of does in the parody films anyways. But you at the same time, copyright laws are supposed to expire for a reason. And I'm both bothered but they don't because of things like this. But I also still want to protect certain institutions, and Superman to me is an institution more than it is something that can just be like put out there for anybody to have their hands in. I don't know. When you think of the amount of people that you've seen write Superman books in the time that you've been reading comics, what is your epitome of what your vision of Superman is?
A lot of it, honestly, is, and I will point out with this, I mean, I've seen probably 9 new writers new to me. I'm using, with that because, actually, no, I think maybe only 8 of them, because it ended with, this capped Dan Jurgens, or theoretically capped Dan Jurgens run on Action Comics with 1000. But I mean, it's been intriguing because I came in during the New 52 relaunch. So it was, Grant Morrison's run on Action Comics, but then what I gravitated more towards was the Superman comic that I forget who it was written by.
George Perez was doing it at first.
Yeah, George Perez, and then it was taken over later by some other people. And it was one of those things that seeing like a lot of the Superman, he had the same, the same thing of, it was save the people. It was to help basically protect his home because where he was from is no longer there, sort of deal. It's one of the things that they hit at in issue 1000. And I think it's one of the things that, like, seeing, like, they did create some new power sets when they brought on John Romita Jr. to do the art. I forget who they had writing the book at the time, but that's where they gave him the solar flare ability.
Right.
But they, at the same time, they also put a leash on it at the time, and now I don't know where it stands now, but with him using the solar flare, it then made him human for about 24 to 48 hours. And then there was some other shenanigans of depowering him, which I think was probably just a way to retcon some of the powers, to where then they can, if we need them again, then we will write them in and stuff like that. But I think I forgot what the original question was.
Well, do you have your idea of what a definitive Superman is between TV shows, movies, cartoons, comic books? Like, in my head, I see Superman a specific way, and it's funny because I've read so many generations of comics and seen these shows and everything. And there's so many different choices of what Superman could be, but in my head, he's still this one thing, and it's not easy to just quantify without going through a ton of examples and stuff. Yeah. But like, that's why I know, for me personally, Man of Steel felt so off. But it exists in the same theory that Superman can be all these different things because everybody has their own interpretation.
Yeah.
And for somebody else, that is their Superman.
Yeah. So I think for me, like with watching, like watching the cartoon shows growing up, and then, now getting into comic books, I think for me, the definitive Superman is the Superman that, is like I said before, is going to do his best to save, to save humanity, to save the little person, just because of the fact that it's what's right. He does the right thing, here. And I think that's where I can agree with you, where Man of Steel, where it doesn't really land, because, you see, especially the end scene in there where he's, fighting Zod, and they're trashing Metropolis and all that. And it's like, he doesn't care about humanity. It seems like he doesn't care about humanity. He just wants to be the last Kryptonian on, in the universe, is almost what it seems like.
You watch the Jim Jeffries show?
Yep.
I like Jim Jeffries. I like his show. But at the end of every episode, he says, I think we can all do better.
Yeah.
And that is Superman to me.
Mm-hmm.
Is a matter of, while people will perceive him as being perfect, the perfect specimen, that's part of why Lex despises him, is because he's both perfect and alien, and so it's unfair that this thing comes from another world and is the perfect human, and so he sees that as a cheat and something that he wants to destroy.
Yeah.
But in Superman's mind, he's not perfect. Just like in Superman's mind, and this is something that Quentin Tarantino got wrong in Kill Bill. Superman's mind, he's Clark.
Mm-hmm.
In Kill Bill at the end, Bill is telling the story about how Superman sees human beings as weak, so he portrays himself as Clark Kent as weak, as hiding his powers and stuff, because that's how he sees humans. That's not how Superman sees humans. Superman sees himself as a human that has extraordinary abilities. He was raised by humans, and so it wasn't until his near adulthood that he discovered where he was from. Again, in my interpretation, in things that I've seen and the way that I've collected in my head of who Superman is. But Superman as Clark doesn't put himself above anybody else.
Yeah.
He looks at the bigger picture. And it is that Boy Scout mentality. It is that thought process of, like, I have to do things the right way, and I'm the person who's going to help the old lady across the street. I'm the person who's going to return money that I found outside of a store, and these are the ideals that I try to bring into my life. This is what is not necessarily attainable, but what is something that I strive towards. Like, this is why he's such a hero to me. Why superheroes are heroes to me is these kind of things are the stuff. I like a hero who struggles. I like a hero who has boundary issues and like isn't always making the right choices. But I also like the heroes that do make the right choices, because it's not necessarily a parable that's trying to teach you how to do that yourself, but it is a nice example.
Yeah.
And Superman is an example, and he's an ideal, and it's important to have ideals. And he can still have failings. You can allow him to fail. You can allow him to struggle, but not fail to the point of where he gives up his ideals. That, to me, is his biggest superpower, is that Superman does right, does what he thinks is right. And he can see when he makes mistakes and learn from them, but he's always striving for that being right thing, and not right over somebody else, but right for everybody else. Whereas Batman fights for justice, what he perceives justice to be. And sometimes that is not what's right as much as what's fair, and what's earned. And Wonder Woman fights for truth. That is the core of her character, but is a warrior too, and doesn't see being a warrior as being a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
I love those core concepts of those characters, and everything else is a stretch beyond that, and the gray areas between. But I love that concept of what Superman is, and that's what I look for. And when I think of the character, that it comes from his upbringing from John and Martha. Those things that were instilled into him as a simple farmer raising, this kid that, yes, came from another planet, but raised him like a kid here, and didn't say, hide your abilities to the point where you'll let people die and don't go into danger if it's going to expose you. It's like, yes, we have to protect you, but you're still supposed to be a good person. You're still supposed to look at the big picture and say, if there's no way to save somebody's life without exposing who you are, then yes, of course you're going to expose who you are. We just want you to always know that should be the worst case scenario, but in that scenario, do it. Absolutely do it. Because I think anything less than you're not a person anymore. You're not a human being. You're something else. You're something that's supposed to be feared because you don't know how to make the right choices. Because Superman's powers are too much in the hands of anybody who has that kind of doubt. Of what's right. That's why the character is relevant all through the 80 years and beyond. Is that's how we should feel. Is if I have to let myself do something that I think is wrong, or if I let myself take advantage of things because of my abilities, because of my powers and stuff, if I let myself become a sports star because I can, because I'm better than everybody else here, that's a cheat, and that's not interesting. That's a villain. It could be an interesting villain. It's not an interesting hero.
But no, yeah, I mean that's you've done it again, Corey. You've made great points, and honestly, I mean, there's a lot I could just echo, but I mean that'll just make the show longer. So I will end it with this. What is the viewers, listeners? What is your iconic Superman? What makes Superman true to you?
Or what makes Superman not true to you? What is it about Superman that you don't like? And what kind of hero do you like? And it's cool if you like Spider-Man because his life is a mess, or you like Hulk because his whole thing is tied to losing control. There's no wrong answer on that.
No, this is one of those questions that we ask to learn, to start a discussion.
For more on this Galactic Network podcast, go to gncast.com. That's GNCASTS.com.